Today, Ken Gluck is our speaker. He is on the staff of the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, if you even knew there was such a commission. The mission of the Tennessee Holocaust Commission is to educate Tennesseans about the history of the Holocaust, seeking to remind citizens that prejudice, hatred, and violence as manifested in the Holocaust and other genocides leads to the destruction of a humane society. The state legislature created the Holocaust Commission in 1984, and in 1996, the new legislation recreated the commission to recognize its primary role as education and to create a parallel not-for-profit body. Support for the commission comes from a state appropriation in addition to privately raised funds, and donations are tax deductible. Please help me welcome Ken Gluck from the Tennessee Holocaust Commission.
Well, he just said everything I was going to, so thank you. Actually, I'm here to talk about my father's story. On top of being the education coordinator, I'm also the son of a survivor, which is in great part what led me to the role that I have. I also spent 12 years teaching history as a middle school teacher here in Wilson County. Not here in Wilson County, but here in the area, Wilson County. For starters, yes, there is a Tennessee Holocaust Commission. That's usually the first thing people ask. As you said, we started in '84. We are the 5th oldest as far as state organizations around the country. So we're very proud of the fact that Tennessee has a commission. There's still many states that don't. We have state standards and regulations as far as what needs to be taught, that kids need to understand what happened. My role as education coordinator is not just for students, although that is the primary source of what I do. I also speak to groups such as yourself, church groups. We do community events around the state. I'm driving constantly. I spoke to your president earlier, and no, I do not belong to a specific Rotary myself because I'm never around in one area long enough on every Tuesday to be part of something. Constantly, I'm anywhere from Johnson City to Memphis and everywhere in between. That all being said, I will let you know I have a sense of humor. I take the Holocaust very seriously, but my father, his way of dealing with the trauma was a sense of humor. He passed that on to me. So if I make a joke, it's not about the Holocaust. I do take the Holocaust seriously, but I do it with a sense of humor, I think. It's a dad joke kind of humor, so bear that in mind. My father's name is Armin Gluck. He was born in Tornyshpalza, that's how that's pronounced, Hungary, which is the northeast corner of Hungary, about 10 miles, give or take, from the Ukraine border. I say give or take because at any given moment, that border has changed over the last 70, 80, couple hundred years. It's 10 to 15 to 8 miles away. He was in a very small town. They were very, very poor. My father was the 7th of 9 children, so he was one of the youngest. And his father was a rabbi. My grandmother, his mother basically just took care of the kids. With 9 kids, it's all you could do. Like I said, they were very, very poor. My father's favorite line was that they could only afford to go window shopping once a month. And when he was 8 years old, nothing to do with the war, it was still long before the war, since he was born in 25. When he was 8, his mother passed away. And they didn't have good health care back then, and especially in a very small, poor farming town, they didn't have much of anything. About a year later, his father passed away. The oldest sister was 18, the oldest brother was 17. They took on the role of taking care of the family. However, the mentality of it takes a village. The village came in and basically they would bring them some food here and there whenever anyone could spare it. They helped bring them clothing, hand-me-downs, whatever it was. But it was that mentality that's been passed down to me of it takes a village. Okay? And I've always tried to pass that along to my students, anyone in my life, that we take care of each other. And I know that that is something you guys do. So, something to be proud of. This picture is the only one I have of the family from before the war. The oldest sister, this was a few years before, obviously she's not 18 yet, but before Margaret came to this country. She left, I believe she was 20 when she came to this country. And Joe, who, he's sitting down, it's hard to see in the picture. He's actually sitting down. He's the next oldest, and the oldest boy. But he's sitting next to his mother. He's actually taller than the twins. It's hard to tell because of the shadowing. But what had happened is when those two had come to this country, they were trying to save up enough money to bring the rest of the family over. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Borders got closed before they were able to come over here. But the reason that my grandmother's picture isn't there is Margaret had put that picture, cut it out and put it into a locket, which has since been lost. So we don't really know, although in later pictures, the family, all the women looked very much alike. The whole family, you could tell that they were related. Of the uncles, my uncles and my dad, at one time or another, every single one of my cousins, including myself, has crawled up as a small child to the wrong leg when you go up from the back with the same exact bald spot, the same exact build. We've always crawled up to the wrong person to find out that's not your father's leg you're pulling out. So, very strong resemblance, so I have to assume my grandmother must have looked a lot like my aunts. My father was born about 10 months after this picture, and then 2 more boys were born after that. There were a few other pregnancies, but because of bad health care, otherwise there'd be an even bigger family. So there were 9, 7 of them were in Hungary during the war itself. My father, when he was in the 8th grade, and again, I don't have a lot of pictures of these things, but when he was in the 8th grade, basically the Hungarians made a deal with the Nazis. Rather than being invaded, they agreed to join the Nazis on the promise that they would then be able to kind of police their own country and take care of their own Jews. And from my dad's own mouth, he had it easy compared to what happened to a lot of people in Poland, in basically every country other than Hungary because of that. But he was thrown out of his school in the 8th grade because Jews weren't allowed to be educated. There's no reason to give them school if they're just going to be around as slaves, slave labor. He was a very self-taught, very smart person. He could do complex math in his head, but never had a chance for formal education because of everything that was going on. He was drafted, quote, drafted at the age of 18 into the Hungarian army. However, it's a very different kind of a way of thinking than if you're drafted, or when the draft went on here. When you were drafted into the army as a Jew, you went in and you were not given a gun or any type of armament. You were given a shovel, or you were given some type of work duty to do. And it was basically slave labor. So they had like encampments. My dad's encampment was repairing roadways, repairing for the Luftwaffe, who flew in and out of Hungary, repairing runways, roadways, bridges, things like that. However, my dad, again, was very fortunate. When he was drafted and went up to get his job, the corporal that was handing out jobs was my father's ex-principal from middle school, and he recognized him. And he couldn't help but have my dad thrown out. It wasn't like he could say, keep this one. So he recognized my dad and said, you're a cook. "You're a baker." My father said, "I don't know how to bake." He said, "You're a baker." It saved my father's life. He had access to food, okay, more so than your average person. He also learned how to, and I'm not advocating stealing, but he learned how to steal food. It's survival, not breaking the law in my mind at that point. These are stock photos. Obviously, we didn't have iPhones back then. I don't have pictures of my father from before this, but this would have been the kind of work he did, repairing these runways, repairing roads, etc., throughout Hungary. And they walked. They walked everywhere they had to go with their shovels. That's what they had to do. Okay, but again, he was treated well. He had access to food. He stayed strong. Okay, as a baker, they had 50-pound bags of flour. He would pick up 2, one on either shoulder at any given point, and bring them in where it needed to go. He was not my height because not great nutrition. He never grew as tall as he probably could have. But at 5'9", I remember one time this guy was messing with him, and my father smiled and said, "Leave me alone." Kept messing with my dad, picked him up by the belt buckle with one arm. He was a broad person. I did not mess with my dad. In January, it could have been December, it might have been January of 45. We're not sure because they didn't have exact way of telling the dates. He just knows it was definitely in the winter. He was on a forced death march from northern Hungary into Austria, where they went to what's called Mauthausen, which was a death camp. That's one thing, and I say because I speak to a lot of English teachers, the first standards for teaching the Holocaust in the state would be 8th grade English when they read a novel about, whether it's Anne Frank or one of the other novels, Night, some schools do. So I make sure the kids understand using the right language, how you speak, the words you choose can be very important. And I've heard different terms that I don't like. There's a dehumanizing process that went on for a good decade, more than that, before the war started, before the actual encampments, the degradation of human beings to the point where people then felt comfortable killing them or putting them in camps and treating them awfully because it was A, legal, and B, there'd been enough rhetoric, enough words. So basically, I've heard the term when people are referring to death camps as extermination camps. I won't use the word extermination except to say it now, because what do we exterminate? Bugs, vermin, bad things. These are human beings. You don't exterminate a human being. You murder them. You kill them. Small but huge little difference between the two. This was a stock photo of a death march. Again, through Hungary, until they got to about here, he was under Hungarian guard. And then at the Austrian border, they were turned over to the, quote, the real Nazis, my dad's words for it. A number of times along the way, they would stop for the night, set up a little camp. The few guards that they had, Hungarian guards, said to them, "You guys stay here. We'll be back in the morning. We're going into town." Because they would always camp outside of town on the road. They stayed. And people asked, why did they leave? Where were they going to go? They didn't know who to trust. They didn't know where to go. Was it a trick? Was it a trap? Who's going to watch them? They didn't know that the war was going to end in 5 months. It did. They didn't know that. We know that in retrospect. That were they going to be living in the woods for 5 years, 10 years? You don't know. And when the Nazis went into towns, the reason they were so successful at finding all of the, or most of the Jews, their neighbors turned them in. Not every neighbor, not every person was bad, but neighbors turned them in because the Nazis had no idea who was a Jewish person living in the town of fill in the blank from anywhere in Europe. It was the neighbors who, they have a nicer house than I do. They have a bigger farm than I do. They have nicer clothes than I do. That's all it takes is one person to say that, and suddenly they're moving into that house and the Jews are being brought to a camp. So they didn't know who to trust because of regular people. So they just kept marching. At any given point, machine gun blasts through the crowds just to see, once they got turned over to the Germans, there'd be machine gun blasts through the crowd as they walked just to see how many they could hit with one little volley. All sorts of things that, not good stuff, obviously. The lucky survivors came here to Mauthausen. Mauthausen was a death camp. And very poignant in my mind, I can hear my father saying the words, which shocked me, and I had to sit there for, he had to repeat what he said afterwards, because it took me that long to process what he was saying. As they were getting closer to the camp, they saw smoke, and he thought, wow, we're gonna warm up. Because they were walking with whatever you had on you in the middle of a brutal winter through the Alps. There's smoke, there's fire, there's heat, there's warmth. So they were encouraged, and as they got even closer, they saw piles stacked up of firewood. So he was very excited about that. I don't show this one when I'm speaking to young kids, but it was not firewood. He survived. He made it to Liberation Day, May 5th, 1945. When he was turned over to the guards, the Nazis, the Hungarians told the Nazis that he was a great baker. He could make bread out of sawdust. Give him a shot. This again helped save his life, because when he got to the camp, and I've come to find out it was rare, but it was not a one-time thing. A number of people whose lives were saved because they had a talent. He was given the right to come into the Nazi barrack side of the kitchens in order to bake for special occasions for the guards. When one of the guards was having an anniversary, or their son was having a birthday, not the higher ups because they had real bakers, but when one of the lower end people was having some type of event, they would let my father go over and bake for them. The fellow prisoners made sure that my dad had nice, newer boots and nice pants with no holes in them. The style back then was to tuck your pants into your boot, making a nice big pocket. So he would stuff food into both pockets, which more than likely the guards saw it and turned the other way, because he was taking care of them, they were taking care of him. He's credited with saving the lives of a number of the people back in his barracks by bringing them food and keeping them strong enough to make it to May 5th. On a side note, I won't go into the whole story, but there was a young man who was 15 at the time. My dad was now 19. There was a young man that was 15 that was back in his barracks that my dad recognized as the little brother, the annoying little brother of one of his good friends from playing soccer. My dad took him under his wing, made sure that he had food, made sure he stayed strong. When they were liberated, it was by the Americans, and I call him my Uncle Tibor. And he was very close friends with my father until the passing. We're still good friends. I'm still good friends with his daughter in California. The families have stayed very close. Anyways, Tibor wanted to pay back America for saving him. And this is just to say the impact, and this is something I say to all my students when I'm out speaking, the impact you have on other people. You don't know the ramifications of being nice, of being good, of helping others, okay? You see the direct correlation, but you don't see how far spread that can be. Tibor came to America, tried unsuccessfully because he didn't speak English, to join the American Army. On the third try, in just a few months, they finally kind of fudged the paperwork to let him in, because they saw he wasn't going to give up. He was going to keep trying to join the Army, so they got him in. He is the only Holocaust survivor, Tibor Rubin, if you want to look it up, R-U-B-I-N, to be awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Korea. He made Rambo look weak. I mean, I won't go into the whole thing, but the guy did stuff that was unbelievable simply because he didn't want to die. He survived. He did incredible stuff. Anyways, that's the impact. My father saved him. He saved countless numbers of American soldiers in Korea. First thing that happens when Americans came in, like I'm sure any one of you would think, give them food. These are walking starvation, just skeletons. So they fed them. Their systems weren't used to having food. It made a lot of people very ill. Some people passed away from that. No fault of the soldiers, but it would be my first thing too, is try and give them food, give them aid. My father spent the first few weeks in a hospital, doesn't remember really what was going on around him. He was in and out of consciousness, running a fever, but he was saved. He lived through it. He went, this is what's called a DP camp, is displaced persons. He went to a camp. He was there about a year. His oldest sister, okay, had survived. She was the one that came to America. Joe had come to America and fought in the South Pacific with the Navy. Well, he didn't fight with the Navy, he fought for the Navy, sorry. There's my dad joke stuff. Sorry. Anyways, Margaret came to America. That was her just before leaving Hungary with the youngest brother, who was either Ernest or, the story is, my Uncle Ernie was the youngest survivor. And my Uncle Ernie was 15 when he went into Auschwitz. And Benjamin was 13. Benjamin was killed that first day. They separated the two. They did their choosing line. One went to the left, one went left, one went to the right. Sorry, you're left and right. And on that day, the youngest was killed. Well, in the Jewish tradition, you don't name someone after someone that's living. You name them after someone that has passed. Naming someone after someone that's living is an insult. And I often said, why is no one named Benjamin? Why didn't anyone name their child Benjamin after Benji? My father said, well, it would be too hard. That's all he said. No one ever talked about it until my Uncle Ernie passed away. And at his unveiling, it's called, where they show the headstone for the first time, his wife looked down, his kids looked down and said, they got his birthday wrong. They hadn't. And that's the day the story came out, a year after his passing. Ernie was the youngest. He passed away. Benjamin, they just switched names and birth dates because they didn't have paperwork for Benjamin. They couldn't find anything, and he had come over with his brother's paperwork that he found and kept that birthday, kept that name, because he was scared he was going to get thrown out of this country for coming over illegally with improper documentation. Never told his wife or his kids that his real name and his real birthday. And I Junior Psychology 101, he was trying to keep his brother alive vicariously and honor his name, because he always felt guilty about letting him go. He should have kept him with him or gone with him, either died with him or kept him with him something, but he regretted ever letting go of that hand. And I think that's part of the reason he never went to change his name or anything else. He just lived by his brother's name and birthday the rest of his life. So, my dad finally made it to an Exodus ship. He left France, going to, at the time, Palestine. The British controlled Palestine. They turned around the ship, took everyone's paperwork. He went to Cyprus Island for about a year. He lived there for about a year until he and a large group of people appropriated a ship late at night and kept all the lights off and ran the blockade and went to Palestine. That is the first picture I have of my father. He joined the Israeli army. He worked as you had two jobs. You had your daily job and you were under attack job. So he was a cook, a baker, and he manned a cannon. That is not him, that's just a stock photo. That is him. After being there for a couple of years, he was able to get sponsored by his brother, and there used to be a map there. Okay, you have to pretend that's Israel. This is North America. He went to Montreal. His brother sponsored him to come to Montreal. And he moved there, lived about a year and a half. I'm not sure the exact amount of time. But his oldest sister, Margaret, had wound up in Connecticut, and therefore a lot of the family moved to Connecticut, minus one sister in Australia, one brother in Montreal. Pretty much everyone else moved to Connecticut. So he got a 2-week visa to come down to Connecticut and visit family. At which point my aunt said to a young lady she knew, "My brother's coming to visit. You should meet him." She said, "No, I don't need to do that. I've got dates. I'm doing fine." No, it's nothing like that. My aunt said, "He's just going to be here 2 weeks. He needs someone to show him around." She said no again. My aunt showed her a photo. She said, "Sure, I'll meet him." That was the photo. That was about 12 days later. Well, actually, that was their second wedding. When she had the dress. Their first wedding was Justice of the Peace. And there are no photos of that, but after he was able to get the paperwork through, about 2 months later, he moved here full time to the United States, and that's the second wedding they had. And they were, well, it says 10 days, I need to edit that, it's 12 days. My mother informed me, they didn't rush into anything, it was 12. This was 1965 when I was about a year old, and as it says there, yes, I was blonde. Got a little bit darker every year. At this point, I'm just happy I have anything still up there. Guess what my dad did for a living? I say we, I was a little kid. He opened a restaurant up in Vermont, in the ski area up there. Had some friends, some other survivors that were in Vermont. They told him about this place. We used to go up and visit a lot, and it just became where we moved and where he wanted us to grow up. So we moved to Vermont, where in 1969, when we first moved there, this is 72 when we were established, but in 69 when we moved up there, I still remember seeing signs on some businesses saying, "No Jews, no blacks," in 1969. This was then in 2011. He lived until 2018. And the reason I have this here is when I show this to people, especially to students, the moral of the story is this is a happy man. Do not let the circumstances of your life dictate who you are going to become. Even if it was for a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever your experiences are. And for students, I make sure they understand bad things will happen to them. Life is hard, but you don't let that dictate every part of your life. He lived a very happy life. He raised a family. He had a successful business. My mom and he were married for 64 years until he passed. My mom at 97, she turned 97 on the 4th, lives with me here in Tennessee. When my dad passed away, I didn't give her a choice. They were still in Connecticut for years, but when he passed, she had no one up there, and we moved her down here with us. Side note, in 2020, we were directly hit by a tornado, and my mom I brought her here to protect her. I dropped the house on her, basically. But she broke her pelvis, she's recovered, she's still around, 97 years old, strong lady. So that is my story, and I thank you for listening. Are there questions about anything? Usually I get silence because it's a
Tell us
heavy
about
story.
the Holocaust
You got a
Commission.
question over here.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how many people are on the commission?
On the commission, I believe there are 13 commissioners statewide. We have a couple of senators and congressmen. We have, that were appointed by the governor himself, someone from the education department, as well as a few survivors or family of survivors now, because other than one gentleman, all the other survivors have passed. We have just people from throughout the community of the state of Tennessee. Our lead commissioner is a lawyer out of Knoxville who will not accept money for what he does. He claims he's a simple country lawyer. He's doing okay. But he devotes a lot of his spare time towards helping our organization to move forward. So, and other than that, there are 4 of us actively working for the organization. There's the director, there's myself for education, we have a historian out of Knoxville who also is a professor of Germanic and Holocaust studies at Pellissippi State, and then we have an office manager. And right now, 1 intern, but we're looking for more. If any of you know any young people that would like to be an intern. So, yes.
The latest situation, I've read some analysis of why some people think that the rise in anti-Semitism is occurring. Have you, in your history, seen any kind of trends towards, can explain why you get a third or more of college students becoming pro-Palestinian and anti-Jewish?
Well, we are not a political organization first, but a guesstimate of why this is happening is college campuses, young people are very pro the underdog. And Israel has become the colonizer, the oppressor of the area, in the eyes of many, the way it's described. All I can say about the whole situation is we live in a bumper sticker mentality of our world. Hate is bad. It's as simple as that. No matter who it's coming from, no matter who it's towards, hate is bad. I wish there was an easy answer for it. If anyone has one, please share it. Please write your congressman. I don't know where to go with it. I just know it's not a good situation on either side right now. On either side. Yes?
I also want to share with everyone, if you've ever been to the Holocaust Museum in D.C., I've been 2 or 3 times myself. You learn every time you go. It's just fantastic. It's worth your time and energy to get there.
We do a lot of work with it's called the USHMM, or the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They are nationwide doing what we do. We work with them hand in hand. We work with an organization out of Israel called Yad Vashem. We work with, there's groups all over the country who are national and international. There's one called Yahad in Unam, which is actually a Franciscan priest, Catholic priest, who started working to learn about the genocide for himself of the Holocaust, and went around the countryside on vacation around Eastern Europe and uncovered site after site after site of where Jews were killed. It was called Holocaust by bullets. In the early days of the war, before they ever went to the camps, they would go in and just find the Jews in an area, bring them out to the country, have them dig a big hole on the side of a hill, and then shoot them all. And a lot of that was undocumented. So he started an organization to uncover that, and now works with organizations around the world to help fight genocides. He's one of the main people going back and forth to Ukraine right now. And he's a Catholic priest doing this. So we work with their organization from time to time. Yes?
John, I have a comment on what you said. So my daughter's at UT, she's a sophomore, and generally someone that forms opinions with information, right? So she was home for Thanksgiving, and in her college-age students today are certainly not watching the news, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. They're not seeking out alternatives to the first piece of information they see, right? So this is Thanksgiving, and regardless of your opinion, she literally did not know that anyone came from Palestine into Israel at the beginning of October. That attack. She literally did not know it happened. And this is not a kid that's usually tone deaf.
Yes.
And it was because all the information she sees on Instagram, Snapchat, or whatever, it's all just an echo chamber of your very small circle of people. And whatever people are in her group, all they were talking about is the current events, what's currently happening in the last week, I guess, is Israel's response, right? So she didn't necessarily have an opinion. She just only knew of Israel's response. She had no idea of what happened at the beginning of October. So to answer your question, John, I think that many people, college-age people, simply don't take the time when they see something like Israel's response to even ask the question, why? Right? Why is Israel doing that? Again, regardless of your opinion about it, was it unprompted? Did they just wake up in the morning and decide to do it? So I think that's the answer, John. I think that they don't bother to, when they see something, they don't ask why, what's happening, what's the whole picture. They certainly don't look into the history of the area. They certainly don't look into the history of discussions of what discussions have even happened in the last 20 years about two states or whatever. They don't even go back that far. And they can go back to the Obama administration and see some information about discussions that did or didn't work out. They don't even go that far. So I think that's the answer, John, is they don't bother to look past the surface of what they see.
Kind of leads into what I was saying, that it's a bumper sticker mentality.
Right.
It's what's the latest, what can I put into 2-3 words?
Right.
And that prevails a lot of times. Yes.
Kind of on tagging on the same thing. I ran youth leadership Rutherford here for a number of years and started out with pictures of famous people, and they had to it's like one of those things you have to write who it is, and they would get like 3 people, and like they didn't know who Queen Elizabeth was. And I'm not talking about Queen Elizabeth I. Some of them didn't even, they didn't know who Princess Diana was. They didn't know, who, and they had no sense of history. And there were some kids that did, but as a whole, the group had no sense of history. And I don't know, it terrifies me because I'm a George Santana person. If you don't understand history, you're going to be doomed to repeat it. And I've spent the experience that I actually went to Auschwitz when I was in college, and that was probably one of the most, from now checking up, awe-inspiring and horrible and wonderful experiences all at the same time, because it really hits you.
Yeah. Yes.
What is the basic reason why Jews are hated?
Because we're different. I'm not saying we are looked at as different. If you really, really, really want to go to the early roots of it, ancient Mesopotamia, in my mind, I used to teach ancient civilizations, and back then, if you didn't go along with the state policies, you were the reason bad things happened. They didn't know science. And this is an oversimplification, but if floods came, who wasn't praying loud enough to the God of the river? Things like that. If a fire came, again, you found some of the blame. And here is Abraham, who was from the city of Ur, which was in ancient Mesopotamia, who thought differently. He said there's one God, not all these gods. And because of that, he was the bad guy in society, and he had to leave. He found Israel, but ever since then, look at just throughout history, in Rome, in Greece, and all these cultures that would take over an area for hundreds of years at a time sometimes, they were the odd man out because they wouldn't adopt to the gods of the people coming in. It was easy for the Greeks to bring in the Egyptians because they had many gods. It might be a different name, but You have the god of fire, the god of the river, the god of rain, the god, all these types of things. And they could kind of say, oh, we have that, you have that, we have that. But the Jews always had one God, and that kind of set them apart. The same reason that early Christians were targeted until it was adopted into the Roman way of looking at things. That's part of it. Part of our culture as a people is education is extremely important. It's pushed heavily. And usually when you're educated, you can be very successful in life. So there's a disproportionate amount of success among the Jews in the world compared to most any other cultural group that's out there. That bleeds into it because people, if you don't have as much, who can you blame? It's certainly not because I didn't take care to get a good education. It's certainly not my doing. Someone must have stood in my way and stopped me. Oh, it's a plot. And it goes on and on. It's that mentality of thinking that makes these, and I know I'm oversimplifying things. You can go, well, there are college courses, there are people that have doctorates on exactly this discussion, and I'm not going to take your time because I know people have to get ready for dinner soon. But again, that's a generalized answer for it, but I can't give a better one.
Ken, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
If there is no further business, we are adjourned.